All right. So this week we're going to begin with vaYiqra, which is Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 32. And as is my custom, back up to last week and kind of go over that so we can start this week. We ended with 31. You shall not turn to a seer, and a false prophet you shall not seek. This, it says, and that's speaking of the seer or the false in them. I am Yahweh. So that means if you seek after these people, that's security. See how that works? All right. So today we're beginning with, and this is a very, very, very literal translation of Hebrew text into Greek. From faces gray hair you shall rise, and honor you faces old, and reverence you from God, you, I Yahweh. Right. So that's, if you read that a few times through, I think you get it. It's a little clunky feeling that way, but certainly not written the way we write things in English, right? So we have mipne, which is pane or pana, the face, but it's not just the face. It's of the face. Did you guys see that? What a visual effect. Anyway, it's the part turned towards anyone, to turn oneself in any direction. So that's the fundamental meaning of the word. We go back and we look at the root, which is pana, and that's to turn oneself in order to go anywhere, hence to turn to or towards any place, to turn oneself away from anyone, figuratively applied to time, to turn itself to pass away. Because, it's not of death necessarily. I mean, we say that somebody passed away, right? But it's of we here we are talking. I say, see you later. I've got to go to Jerusalem. So I turn and I pass away from your sight, not necessarily die. Hopefully you guys get that. It's funny how these older um, lexicons are written. You don't realize it because our language has changed so much just since the 1850s that we tend to put more modern ideas in there. And when they talk about the passing away, though it's not something you would eliminate from this idea, it actually doesn't have anything to do with it. It's the passing away from your sight, not that they died. Anywho, our next word is sheva, um, which is gray hair. It's, you guys, some of you older people have heard the word hoary, hoary hair. They say that of an old man. That means gray hair. They used to call it hoary hair back in at least in the 1850s. That was real common. Because I see that. I read a lot of books from that time period. I really like the writing style of that time period. So anyway, that's what that means. It's of an old man, also of an old woman, but they were trying to be politically correct, I suppose. No, they weren't. Um, Old age of an old person. So you get the idea. It's someone much, much, much older than me. No, it's pretty much me. This is takum. You shall rise. So we have essentially the face has turned away from or turned toward. It means both. To turn toward Jerusalem is to turn away from where you were. So you use the same word for the same idea. So there's this turning away or toward a gray haired person. You shall rise. Takun kuma Adonai Hosheini. Oh, I haven't thought about that song in years. To arise from a seat, from a bed. There is an added sense of urgency or purpose. To arise against anyone, to exist, to go forth, to grow up, to become a man. Spoken of youth, to increase with riches, to flourish, to stand before anyone, or just to stand, to oppose them. That'd be the negative side of that. To stand fast. I'm just not going to do anything until I'm sure. That's a good way to stand fast. To remain, to continue, which is the main thing Jews do. We just keep pressing on, right? So we have this turning toward or from a gray-headed person. You will stand to your feet. You will arise. You will grow up. That's what they mean when they say in the 1850s to become a man. That means to grow up. To stand, to remain. What's that? What would that be? That would be listen to these people, learn from these people, stand on the things that these people taught you. Hopefully you're seeing all that. Then here's Panay, and that's I mentioned that with Meepne, which is really from faces. So then this would be where to go? Well, it's just the word faces. Properly the part turned toward anyone. I've already gone through that, and I've gone through Panah. So then we have what? Zaken. Well, that's the word for old. The other word was gray hair, indicating elderliness. And now we actually have the word zaken, old, to become old, to grow old properly, to have the chin hanging down, decrepit. It actually uses the word decrepit. You guys starting to get where this is going? I bet you are. Then it's vaYiqra. It's from Yara. Properly to tremble, to fear, be afraid, be very, very afraid. Those old decrepitude people are dangerous. Probably that's not what right. To fear someone or something in the same manner of verbs of fleeing, to fear, but it's also to reverence as one's parents. To fear God. What is that? To reverence Him. To tremble for joy. To flee to Him. Not from Him, to Him. Yeah, that probably help. I've got all these other words in here. I'm not really sure why I have them here, so I'm not going to get into that. But we have this idea. You read the Bible, and it talks about to fear God. And I remember asking a man, he was a Christian man, and this was probably 30 years ago. What did it mean to him? I knew he was very religious, and I said, "What does it mean to you to fear God?" And he says, "Oh, my mama taught us that we should fear our daddy and fear her because man, they can just really give us a whooping." And I was just floored by that. Really, that's what you think of God? I mean, I remember when I used to think of God that way, but you tend to forget that, when I was growing up, I had a stepdad who just beat me until I passed out. Then he would shake me and wake me up and make me clean the blood off the wall from my head hitting it. and tell me to clean that up before I get angry and hurt you. Really? And then I'd go to this old church. The lady across the street started taking my sister and I to church, and of course, we were little kids at the time, and uh, believe me, where we were living at the time, there were no synagogues. But she took us during the summer, and we'd go there and eat cookies and sing songs about baby Jesus and play games and just have the greatest time. And so, we fell in love with baby Jesus immediately. So that one thing led to the other, and we wound up growing up in the church as kids. But you'd go to church and they would tell you that God was just like your dad. I didn't have a very good understanding of God. Now, this man I was talking to, I knew him very well and knew that he had grown up with mom and dad in the house. We're still in the house. He'd been, he was a grown man, had gone to college and had been, I think, in the military. And so, he'd been away from home 15, 20 years at least by then. So his parents were still together and still in love and all that kind of stuff. So he didn't have that idea like I did. His was more about you better, straighten up and fly right or you're going to get in trouble. And mine was more about, God's going to beat me half to death any chance he gets. So, but I still remember, by then I guess I'd forgotten what that was like or something. I was getting up in age. I was at least 22 at the time. I've been 22 for 50 years now. No matter. You guys do know I'm lying to you, right? So, but I was surprised at him saying that because he came from such a good family life, because this isn't about being scared of God. This is about the trembling anticipation of a young couple on their wedding night. This is about that intimate relationship, that knowing that God loves you and knowing that your love for him is just more than you could ever express. That's what the fear of God is. And only a stupid person would think that God was never going to punish them, because the Bible says God punishes those whom he loves. It says he chastens them. Does anybody know what chasten means? Anyway, so we got to talk about some reverence here of God, right? Then the next thing it says, Me Elohecha. Literally, that's from God, you. And we've already had this actually. It's because it's followed up Ani Yahweh. And so what was just said there is that your reverence that you show to the elderly, that reverence comes from your reverence of God. So my translation, when looking at the face of someone and recognizing that that person is elderly, you shall stand up and you shall show honor in the presence, or in his presence or their presence. Your reverence is from God. I am Yahweh. There was a time in world history, and in particular American history, that if an elderly person walked in the room, everyone stood to their feet. It's because of this verse. It went out through the whole world. I mean, you had the Muslims did it, and sometimes still do. Kind of like there are Christians who'll probably still are doing that. I know I grew up doing it in the going to church. There are certainly Jews who do it, but there are also non-religious people who do it, and they don't realize that it's just the uh, influence that the religious people hat on the non-religious, if you know what I'm saying. But just an elderly person coming in the room would cause everyone in the room to stand. And then that kind of whittled down to when a teacher first stepped into the room, everybody stood to their feet. I grew up, every time the teacher walked in the room, everybody in the class stood to their feet. That's public school, that's not some private school. When a woman uh, walked into a room, I grew up, every man in the room stood up. If you're in a situation where there's no seat left for her to sit in, you stood up and offered her your seat. If you were out on a date, you opened the door for her, and when she went to sit down in her chair at the table, you pulled the chair out, she would sit down, you would wait for her to lift up, and then you would push the chair in a little bit further to help kind of tuck her in, and then you would go and sit down. What's odd to me is that there are people my age who never learned etiquette like that. I did. I was taught that mostly at home, but we actually did that sort of thing at school as well. That was not unheard of. So all of that comes from this verse because we used to show that kind of respect. And there are still cultures today where the elderly are the most important people. They're the ones with the life experience. They're the ones that can tell you, if you keep doing that, your face is going to get position. No, that's a perversion of it. No, they knew that these people had life experience. They would listen to somebody who could tell you, I used to do that when I was young as well. I stopped doing it because it had, 4 or 5 adverse reactions, an elderly person can generally tell you that lying to save yourself in the here and now you'll always pay a price for that. It will always come back to bite you. There is no such thing as a noble lie. There is no such thing as a white lie. There is no such thing as omitting some piece of information in order to cover something up. That is not situational truth. It's a lie. A lie is a lie. And so, as older people know, that if a woman asks her husband, "Does this dress make me look fat?" Us older people are okay with saying, "No, I think it's your butt that makes you look fat," or whatever. I think that someone who would ask that question deserves that answer. And us older people can get away with that. You younger guys, careful with that one, with that little piece of information. But the older people are the ones who have lived life. We've made all the same mistakes that you young people are making now. We were teenagers at one time. We were little children at one time. We were young lovers at one time. We were newlyweds at one time. uh we were climbing the ladder of success at one time. We have compromised our beliefs at one time. All of those things that we've done and learned the hard way. Young people could learn from us and not have to go through those things. I was taught this when I was 9 or 10 years, and it stuck with me. I grew up from that point on always hanging out with the old people. Of course, I thought 20 somethings were very old back then. uh, that, and of course, age is quite relative. But I used to listen to the adults and just looking for anything that I could glean from them. And the older I got, I liked hanging out with the college educated and liked hearing about the discipline that they had studied and maybe were working in. You do find out early on that people will get their degree in some discipline, but they never work in that discipline. I received a degree in engineering back in 19 and I think it was 10 or 15 years before I worked as an engineer. Went off and did all kinds of other things. When I worked at Boeing Aerospace, we had I worked in when I moved over to the software side of the house, we, uh, we had a chemist who was a computer programmer. There was a couple of us that were double E's, that's electrical engineers. We were programmers, which that makes sense actually, because we're designing software that causes hardware to do things in aircraft, and we're monitoring heat loads and electrical loads and, space analysis and all that kind of stuff. So that made sense. But a chemist, oh, I was so glad she worked there because she taught me more about writing computer code than anyone else did. She was a very good teacher too. But anyway, hopefully you get what I'm saying. Listen to those people that have gone ahead of you. Now, if that person that's gone ahead of you is a blooming idiot, if they're the flower of their family, don't listen to them. Come on now. And you can generally tell pretty quick if they've gone through life and learned, or if they've gone through life never having learned. Because there are an awful lot of men who never grow up. Sorry, girls. Just because you marry them does not mean that you will be able to change them and make them into whatever it is that you want. I told my girls growing up, don't do that. Whatever the man that you pick is the man you're going to be married to. There's very little you're going to do to change him. If he's a mean drunk when you marry him, he'll be a mean drunk when you divorce him. Just saying, just throwing that out there. Can't just, but anyway, whether they're the flower or they're truly wise, God is telling us that we should always uh, show respect and reverence to the elder. I guess the one thing I should say about that before I move on, the standing on and all that I talked about. Yeah, you can literally stand up when they walk in the room. And if you take the Bible literally, you better start standing up every time some old gray-headed person walks in the room, male or female, makes no difference. This book is written in the masculine. It does not exclude women. So you're either going to have to take that approach, or you're going to have to do what it's actually saying. Show respect, show reverence. All right. So we're going on to verse 33. All right. Well, I didn't see the blinky thing. Okay, the very literal translation here on 33 is, "And for he dwell with you, foreigner, in land your, not you shall oppress with it." All right, my favorite rock group all time, Foreigner. Well, I don't know. It's kind of a toss up between Lou Graham and Steve Perry of Journey. Wow, those two boys could sing. All right, so we have vaYiqra, which is and because, Yagar, Gur, really, not Gar. It'd be the same thing. He dwell, to turn aside from the way, from the path. Hence, to turn aside to anyone, to tarry anywhere. And this is not the path of Torah, by the way. This is a real path, walkway, a street, a sidewalk. To tarry anywhere as a sojourner, a stranger, to sojourn, used of individuals. The signification is taken from that of turning aside, since one who is timid and fearful of another goes out of the way and turns aside from him. That's the negative use. To gather together or gather selves together, that's the opposite use, all of which is used for the same word. You cannot use them all at the same time. We are not talking about running away here. We are not talking about gathering. We are talking about Dwelling somewhere. You're turning away. You're turning in for the night. That's how we say that in English. Turning in for the night, or turning in for that evening, or whatever. If you work the night shift, turning in for the day. I don't know, but you're dwelling somewhere. You're staying somewhere. That's why they use this word, because you're staying overnight in a motel, staying overnight at a friend's house, staying overnight in your own house. It's a place where you dwell. It's where you not necessarily live, but that's where you're staying, right? Then it's, yes, it is, itcha, which is with you. So, and because literally he's going to dwell with you, then next it says, ger, foreigner. Um, I want to know what love is. That's their only number one hit, which is hard to believe. They have what, 10 or 15 mega hits, and none of those went number one. Isn't that wild? They really got rooked over. I'm telling you, they've not even been put in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Anyway, something's up. Something's fishy there. But a foreigner, a sojourner, a temporary visitor, a stranger, a person living out of his own country, of foreign shepherds and nomadic tribes wandering about with their flocks in the land. But I spoke about this either last week or week before. I don't remember exactly when. When the Septuagint was translated from the Hebrew into the Greek, which should never have happened, but it did. So I digress on that one. But they use the word proselutos, proselyte. You hear it? That's the word they used. And there's a reason why they use that word. Because think of what Israel, they're receiving the law at this moment, right? It's being written down, it's being read to them. They're in this moment. They're not, we haven't gotten to the part where they get into Israel yet. So God, that's why it's spoken this way when these people come into your land. Israel is going to be a place where God is the only king. Or at least that's the way it was supposed to have been set up. You guys know what happened. When it first started, God was the only king. They decided they wanted a man king, and boy, did they pay the price for that one. And God told them they would too before he even did it. But he did it because they asked. The idea here is that you're in a country where God is the ultimate judge, and God has laid out his law. And in this country, you're not going to work on a Sabbath, period. End of story. Doesn't make any difference who you are. So you cannot come and dwell in Israel and work on Saturday. Now, if you cross the border, you live on one of the outskirts and can cross the border to go to work, well, that's a different story. But if you're in the land of the place where God is king, then you're not going to have foreigners dwelling there. I mean, dwelling for a night is not exactly the idea here. The idea behind dwelling is that you're staying there for some time, maybe even for a very long time. This is the idea behind our previous word. So you have proselyte. I couldn't think of the English word there. This is somebody who is converting to Judaism. And yes, Jews sometimes have to convert to Judaism. It's interesting to me that you have Jews that converted to Judaism in the New Testament, and Christians don't have any clue that that happened. They think that there was a new religion started, a religion, by the way, that didn't exist until 300 years after the last apostle that actually followed Yeshua died. You don't even have that religion in their time. They didn't start. the Christianity. None of those men that followed Yeshua had any idea what Christianity was. There are no first century Christians. There are no Christian Jews in the New Testament. It's just not there. Now, translators have put it there, but if you read the Greek text and you know and understand that that was written by Jews to Jews concerning matters of the Jewish religion, then you really understand what's going on. There was a man named Shaul. They call him Paul these days. And you can see the why, because he was had dual citizenship. He was a Jewish uh, citizen of Israel, but he was also a Roman citizen of Tarsus, which I think means basket weaver. Seems right. Um, so he had a dual citizenship. And I guess at the time, to have that dual citizenship, you had to have a Roman name. So they called him Paulus, which when the English translation got a hold of it, it became Paul. But his Hebrew name, the name he was given at birth, was Shaul. Now, this man was trained by Gamliel. I don't remember which one. There was the original Gamliel, and then Gamliel the second and the third, and down to the 150,000th. I don't know. But he was trained by the one who was the one. If you were really going to move up the ladder in Jewish culture and in Jewish politics in particular, if you were going to be heading up the ladder toward, uh, maybe not high priest, but say someone in the Sanhedrin or something like that, you wanted to be trained by Gamliel or Shammai. That either one would have been just as impressive, but he was trained by the one that was really important because he lived in that very time period. So he goes out and begins to arrest, beat, torture, and even put to death these people who were following Yeshua. And then he gets on his high horse and he's riding his high horse down the road, and all of a sudden this bright light flashes and he gets knocked off his high horse. That's the way I've always liked to put it, because he deserved it. God's law says that you can't do those things. And he had a letter from the high priest at the time saying that it was okay for him to do this, to walk into a synagogue and say, hey, you believe in Yeshua, we're going to take you out and stone you to death. He was doing that kind of stuff. Well, he had to convert to Judaism, real Judaism, where you follow God's law and you don't beat up, terrorize, and kill your own brothers. So when it talks about his conversion, that's what they're talking about. It has nothing to do with a religion that did not exist. Just saying, just throwing that out there. Okay, so these foreigners, these strangers, these proselytes are people who are converting to Judaism. Maybe they're Jews that came from some place where they didn't have a synagogue, they didn't have a rabbi. Maybe they had one of the scrolls, maybe they didn't, because back in their day, they would not have had, a big, thick black book or a big, thick purple colored book. My Jewish Bible is purple. And the Christian one we have, or used to have, I haven't seen that thing in years, was black, big, thick books. They didn't have books back in his day. Although that was kind of some of them were cutting up the leather and like sewing it together, kind of like a book, but they didn't really have books at the time. They had scrolls. And if you had any part of the Bible, you had a single scroll, because that took a whole year's salary of the average salary that was made by people in that time period, an entire year's worth to buy a single book. So you generally had Exodus or Leviticus, as they're called today. You didn't have the whole book, just a little bit of it. And you can read it and it's your language, but you realize that your language is idiomatic. So there's a part of it back then they would have been able to understand it better than a modern Jew would today, because modern Judaism is, or the language is not idiomatic. It's a literal language with a ton of idioms. I mean, just a truckload of idioms. But back in the day, it was an idiomatic language. Everything was said in an idiomatic manner, even the law. So these people, particularly in the first century, were having a lot of trouble understanding what they were reading. You needed someone to take you through that, someone who was trained in that dialect of Hebrew, the biblical dialect, which again was idiomatic, especially in the first century. The level to which that idiomatic phraseology of the language went to by the first century was way beyond anything that we're reading in the law. There's parts of it in the law, but not to the degree that it was in the first century. You really had to have somebody that was well trained in this to help you understand the law. We don't even have that anymore. Uh, but anyway, so these are people are trying to learn to live according to God's law. So a proselyte could be a Jew, and it could have been a foreigner, because Judaism wasn't a bloodline. It never has been, and it shouldn't be thought of that today. Judaism is a religion. And so to call yourself a Jew and say you don't believe in God, you're not a Jew, not a Bible Jew. And to say that you're a direct descendant of Abraham, oh, give me a break. Nobody has Abraham's DNA. No scientist has the DNA that came from Abraham. There is no way for you to know if you're truly a Levite. Oh, oh. I thought you were telling me to wait. Sorry, a little something to coat my throat there. Oh no, my clock went off. I've never seen it. Oh no, the plug came out. Okay. All right. Well, when I get around 10, you got to let me know. Okay, where was I? All right. So I think I beat that dead horse enough. Let's move to the next word. Be'ar zachem, inland yours. So yeah, that's the root word eretz. you know, it's difficult to get that out of it, right? That's why dictionaries for Hebrew have not really been there, that help people out who don't know their Hebrew, because you'd be looking in the bees, if you will, to find this word, and you'd never find it because it would be in the aleph. I would not suggest you think of an aleph as an A. You can think of it as a one, but never think of it as an A. I don't want to get into all that grammar stuff. Not today. I'm not in the mood. But anyway, that makes it hard to look things up, you know. But Eretz, the earth, very loosely it's used of the earth. And from time to time, it should be translated as earth. Most of the time, it should be translated as land. Land, land, because that's what Eretz is. It's land. So it's the right way to say it would be inland you or inland your, but we would say in your land because we say things very backwards in English. It'd be easier for Americans to learn other languages if we would speak our language properly. Just saying. Anyway, then we have lo tonu oto. So not you shall oppress is tonu. You will not oppress, to act violently, to oppress. In other passages, it is used of a epithet for a sword. Did I say that word right? I think I did. The oppressing or violent sword. Oppression is a very wide ranging word. The people that our government are going after right now, they're going after the former president. They went after his attorneys. They're breaking all kinds of laws to do this and saying no one's above the law. That's hysterical. And then they're going after the January 6th people who merely stood on the lawn outside that building are looking at years of imprisonment. That's oppression. When the government gets to the point where everything comes from them and they've forgotten that they're actually supposed to serve the people, and they get to the point where the people are supposed to serve them, that's oppression. And those are extreme examples. um yeah, Donna said we're going to get taken down. Well, I'm not saying it's good or bad. How's that? I'm not really trying to be political. That's oppression. And oppression can be being mean to your wife and your kids, holding back things from them that you're just doing it because you're being mean. I mean, I'm trying to think of some really lightweight type oppression. Um, no, I don't know. Doesn't really matter at this point. If they're going to take us off the air, they're going to take us off the air. Because I'm really not trying to be political. I'm just trying to find some way to talk about oppression, because the dictionary just doesn't give us much to work with. This is acting violently. See, that's even beyond the government. um I don't know, I guess if you're the one being treated with that kind of oppression, you would think of that as violent. But I think that the Hitler thing would be more akin to what's being said here, because Hitler got all these people. They were called brown shirts, and he got them to go out and have riots in the street and hurt, in particular, Jewish people and poor people and black people. Well, that guy hated almost everybody. But that was the violent, because they were killing people, they were harming people physically. So it goes all the way. That probably would have been a better example to give than the government, because that the government thing is way lower than that. I mean, of course his government did the same thing, but um and just about on the same scale, except it's just because look at how many countries they overthrew and stuff like that. So that oppression is the violence, and this other oppression is lower than that, and then the family thing is lower than that. Uh, and then there's people that talk about the microaggressions and stuff like that. And frankly, I think that most of the stuff they call microaggression is not aggression in any way, but they do have that right, to the degree that there are such things as what they're calling microaggressions. It's that saying those things underhanded that hurt somebody's feelings and stuff like that. So you're running the gamut from violently, killing people, all the way down to subtly hurting their feelings, purposely. It's not hurting someone's feelings, just stating facts may hurt someone's feelings, but that's not the oppression. The oppression is saying it to put them in their place, to put them down, right? So that whole thing here is covered, and God is saying you're not allowed to do that. So see, Hitler did not have the right by God's law to do what he did. No government has the right to do what, say, Venezuela's country did, or I hate to say what's America doing, because I don't think it's at that level, but there's some of that there, right? You can't see that and not see what's going on. And because what does that do? That leads to exactly what Trump did. You come after me, I'm coming after you. Right? No, that's not the right. Stop it. Both sides. DOJ, quit going after Trump. Trump, forget about going after them. How about we fix some things that need to be fixed? Would that be okay? Anyway, to the translation. And because a proselyte will dwell with you in your land, you shall not oppress him with it. The fact that he's a proselyte, you're not allowed to do that. In other words, and here's a good example. Maybe this will keep us on the air. A really good example. You got all these people coming across the border, right? And there's one side jumping up and down. Oh, they're sending all their worst, and they're all the evil people are coming across the border. No, that's not what I'm seeing. I mean, yeah, there probably are some, maybe a lot of them. I don't know, but we're not allowed to treat them badly. They've come into our country. Our president, whether legal or not, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. What would I know about that? Uh, um, I mean, because you got some people saying just the fact that they came across that border makes them a criminal. Well, I'm not so sure. If someone's chasing me with a gun and I'm running across to the other side of the border, I'm not so sure that really makes me a criminal. And you know, some of that's going on. But these people are supposed to be treated as if they're one of us. While they're in our country, they should not be oppressed. We should not be using them for cheap labor. We should not be using them for political ends. We should not, you know what I'm saying? We should not be doing that. Now, do we owe them food and a place to live? No, we don't. That's not what this means. Is it okay for us to do? Well, if we can afford it, why not? It's the problem is as the mayor of New York was saying, we don't have the resources, right? I don't buy the whole where'd Ron DeSantis send people? Martha's Vineyard. I don't buy them saying they don't have the resort. Nonsense. You got an island full of ginormous houses, ginormous empty houses. You got the New York asking, hey, can you sponsor some of these families? Which is, I think, not a terrible idea. I don't know if you want to take in, if you're scared and you're worried about, hey, this guy with his wife and kids coming in, we don't even know if they're really wife and husband and wife. We don't really know if that's their kids. Well, take in the woman with the kids. You could do that. I don't think that's terrible. On the other hand, if you got 4 kids in a 2-bedroom house, probably you shouldn't be sponsoring anybody. But I mean, these people with these mass resources, if it's okay to ask families to let people come and live in their house, what's wrong with all those houses with 40 bedrooms in them that are sitting empty on Martha's Venue? Why not let some of them stay in those houses? Hey, Hollywood, why aren't you opening up all your extra bedrooms? I mean, if it's good for the goose, why isn't it good for the gander? Just saying. But none of that's what God's saying. He's not saying we have to go to these extremes. That's not what God's saying here. God's saying that they should have their basic human rights. They should not be treated badly just because they're here. In fact, it's more important that we treat them with respect while they're here. Does that mean we have to give them citizenship? No, it does not. Does that mean we can't prosecute them for committing that crime of crossing that border? No, it don't mean that either. It's just that if you're going to put them in the cages that the Obama administration built, and that's a fact, and we will get cut off for this, then they shouldn't be more people in those cages than you can handle. So honestly, if they're Biden's alternative, flying people around everywhere else, is actually a better alternative if you're going to try to treat these people well. I don't think it's the right alternative. I don't think the border should be open, but that's my opinion, and who cares? Maybe 4 people. It's not like I'm getting my message out to the whole world. I'm not a threat to the whole world, YouTube. I'm not. Just saying, just throwing that out there. All right, so it's going to go into a little bit deeper about this
The blessing, vaYiqra.
and all that kind of stuff. It just boils down to, at this point, all that's been said is that you need to treat these people as if they really are a citizen. You need to treat them with the same pleasantries, wave at them, say hello. If they say hello to you, don't cut in front of them when you're in a store trying to purchase something. You don't treat them like second class citizens. Just because they're not a citizen doesn't make them second class. If the current king of England comes to America, we should not treat him like he's second class just because he's England. And we shouldn't treat him like he's above the first class because he's a king. No. They need their basic human rights. And that's really kind of all this is. I didn't mean to take it directions. I just having trouble figuring out how to say this. I guess I should have thought it through. I didn't really realize I was going to get into that today. So in verse 34, now I have close to 10 minutes. Where am I now? Okay. Well, I want to go ahead and kind of get started on this. The literal English, a native from you, he will be to you. See, got to treat him like he's one of you. The stranger that dwells with you and love you to he, so you got to show love to him. And from he, you, so he's supposed to treat you the same way. For strangers, the proselyte, for you were proselytes. Oh, we're getting into something really good this next week. Off the air, but between us, we will get through this. We'll find a way. There are competitors. YouTube. Competitors. Anyway, for you, speaking of the Jews, you were strangers, proselyte in the land of Mitzrayim, which is Egypt. I Yahweh, God's you. So that's what I have to say about it. God, that's what he's saying. I think I've given you a pretty good tease. Next week's going to be a really good one. I like that God called the Jews proselytes in the land of Egypt. That's going to be some good stuff. I'm going to have to cut it off here. I'm running out of time. I just don't have enough time to really get into this week, but I think that's a good teaser. That's a good cliffhanger for you. The proselytes, the Jewish proselytes in the land of Egypt. Shalom v'shalom, everybody. Guess I should have said shalom v'shalom.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.